Hello everyone, welcome to ClickHeads. I'm Eddie the Chump, and today we're going to be talking about how to pick the best crosshair settings in Valorant. Now, just like any FPS with a consistent crosshair, there is a large part of this decision which is based on player preference. However, there are factors which can help inform your preference to ensure you have the crosshair that suits you as a player perfectly. Valorant as a game recognizes this and gives you more choice than you can shake a vandal at, with its own dedicated option page specifically designed to help you hit more crispy headshots. We're going to go through those options, explain why they're there, and give you some pointers depending on your level of experience. So first things first, let's explain the difference between inner and outer line options. Valorant actually has a two-part crosshair, allowing you to have one that, say, doesn't move under any circumstances, and one that does, either with movement or firing error, or both, overlaid over your fixed one. To make these options simple to understand, I'll show you what these options do on a single reticle as it's easier to see. Movement error will widen your reticle while moving, and then close that in when you're still, effectively giving you a visual guide for when your weapon will be accurate. The amount the crosshair widens while moving is dependent on the gun you're using, indicating how accurate it is if you choose to fire while moving. A good comparison would be the Spectre, which has less movement accuracy penalty, compared with, say, the Marshal, which is much more severely punished. Now, movement error is very useful if you're new to how Valorant shooting mechanics work, or indeed the game that inspired those mechanics, Counter-Strike. If you come from other games, the fact you have to be still to be accurate can be very jarring, with some uninformed people calling this objectively terrible. Now, that is just inexperience in my opinion. Once you get accustomed to this, you will understand how deep the game can actually be. But here's the thing about movement error. It does tell you when you can shoot accurately, but unless you have a center dot as well, it can be hard to place your crosshair in the right spots as you navigate the map, which is a vital part of pre-aiming, which in turn is a vital part of aiming in general in a game like Valorant. I have quite a lot of Counter-Strike experience, but at the beginning of my playtime with Valorant, I used a single crosshair with movement error and a dot to reacclimatize myself to how the game functioned, and I would only really recommend this option to beginners as those are the people that will benefit most from the info that it provides. Once counter-strafing and stopping yourself to shoot become muscle memory, reticles with movement error can be too distracting, as you'll spend too much of your concentration looking at the crosshair and not at who you're trying to shoot at. Now, that opens up a very deep conversation which really belongs in a more advanced aim guide, but I'll give you the cliff notes here. At advanced levels of play, you don't want to be looking at your crosshair as a point of focus the entire time. There are many things that you need to pay attention to at the top levels of play. These include things like the minimap, ult status, health, enemies remaining, and indeed enemies directly on your screen. Players with amazing aim have control of the center of their screen. That is to say, they have a zone on their screen whereby they can automatically adjust and flick to an enemy within that zone purely from muscle memory and practice. The better the aimer, the bigger that zone of control is. For these players, a distracting crosshair is not something that they want. They need clarity. For them, looking at their crosshair too much will get them killed. This is why you see a lot of very experienced players picking very simple reticles without all the functions that you can actually enable in Valorant. That does not mean that you should just copy those players, however, as if we're being honest about our own levels of play, some of us need these extra functions while we're learning. Firing error is a different case. What this will do is give the player feedback about weapon recoil, and it does this in several ways. Firstly, it will tell you as you fire roughly how wide a weapon spread is becoming, and secondly, it will tell you when your recoil spread has reset. And it's this last function that is really key. Full spraying in Valorant is nowhere near as good as it is in CSGO, because a good part of that spray will have random error introduced into it, whereas in CS, the recoil patterns are entirely fixed, meaning a player could feasibly learn it, and with practice, just spray all the time at every range. Valorant is specifically designed not to be this way, with tapping and bursting being highly encouraged in the right situations. The thing about bursting is, if you fire a short burst and then very quickly fire again, your recoil will not have reset properly. Firing error will tell you when you will be accurate again, and this is very useful. This is the reason why firing error is used by some pros and movement error is almost universally shunned. There is also the option to have the top line of your reticle fade when spraying. If you're electing to use firing error, this option will let you see your weapon's traces more easily as you continue to spray. However, with spraying being much more unreliable in Valorant, you have to evaluate for yourself whether that would be something you'd want to be doing in the first place. I have used it, but I found it just encouraged me to hold mouse 1 down, so I turned it off. That's just me though. So those are two of the more advanced crosshair functions that you should understand, but I started this by mentioning that the reticle in Valorant is two-part, so you can have an inner and outer line options with these behaviors on or off. Now you might think to yourself, that's the best of both worlds, and for you it might be. Having a fixed inner crosshair and some smaller lines on the outside that give you feedback about movement or recoil or both, again, while learning the game, this might be very useful to you. But I am of the belief that the better you get, the simpler you would want your reticle to be so it doesn't get in the way. Some top-level players use only a dot, for example. Perhaps you like that. There is actually a difference between putting an enemy in your crosshairs and putting a dot on them, especially at range, but you'll have to test that out for yourself. Let's move on now to the more basic functions, such as line length, thickness, gap, and visibility. You might think that a bit backward, but explaining the more complex options first seemed appropriate to me, as a lot of players won't even know what they really did and therefore might not explore them. First up, what is the main difference between having, say, a big crosshair or a small one? Well, the longer the lines you have, the easier it is for a newer player to understand where the center of their screen is, and therefore practice putting it in the right place before a gunfight even happens. Longer lines will also help you track an enemy, as the guidelines are essentially longer. But what are the downsides of having a bigger crosshair? Well, higher visibility is both a boon and a curse for reasons I've already explained. Yes, you will be able to tell where you're aiming more easily, but you will also spend more time looking at it, which, while better for beginners, is something better players don't really want. For all these basic options, this is the guiding principle you should internalize: visibility versus getting in the way. I'll use the gap or offset option as an example. I like quite a wide gap because it enables me to quickly put an enemy's head in the middle of my reticle at close to medium ranges. As an entry fragger or an op player on defense, this is what helps me the most for my style of play. Where a larger gap is worse is precision at longer ranges. When your offset is much larger than your target, there's an element of guesswork at play, which is obviously subject to human error. Depending on how you like to play, you might want to change up how tight or loose the offset is on your crosshair. If you're very passive, for example, you might want a smaller offset to more accurately tap people at range or even while ADS'd. Now, I have been known to have some truly shocking reticles. It's actually a point of fun in my friendship group, but they are nothing compared to some that I have seen in-game, with a fair few inexperienced players picking crosshairs that either completely obscure targets on their screen or the opposite, having such a wide and large reticle that aiming with any precision would seem impossible. A lot of this is preference with the basic options, and some will tell you that's all it is, but it's not. There's a reason all the best players have something similar to each other. Sure, the color might be different. I find cyan easier to use than green, for example. The thickness or outline opacity might vary, but not by much. My advice is to experiment in the training stage. Start with movement and firing error options on or off, depending on if you think you need the help they provide, and gradually try to simplify your crosshair as your experience and gameplay level increase. If you are truly new, don't be afraid to explore. Even I found movement error with a dot useful in my first few weeks playing. Remember, a crosshair won't be the biggest reason you're not owning everyone. Generally, that will be because of pure experience and practice. That is, of course, unless you elect to use a reticle that will secure you a place in the Crosshair Hall of Shame. You won't be alone, I have quite a few entries myself. There can be a tendency to overthink your crosshair, to constantly switch settings, or to directly copy your favorite player's reticle, especially amongst newer players. Radically changing your crosshair every time you have a bad game is a trap I have fallen into myself, and I highly suggest you don't do that. If you're losing the center of your screen in fights, make it a tiny bit bigger or the lines a little bit thicker. Having trouble hitting precise shots at range? Make it a little bit smaller, adjust the offset in small increments, etc. Just like adjusting your sensitivity, it will take time to truly settle. Remember, the better you get, the less you want visual distraction. I really hope you enjoyed the video and found the information useful. That's about all I want to talk about today. If you like the content on this channel, please hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you get notified when we upload. Until next time.